So we're starting here tonight with the Nation of Islam. And often there's a misunderstanding in people's kind of general conceptions of this period. And the misunderstanding or the misconception is that somehow black people started off as nonviolent, and then at some point, maybe King's assassination or something else, drove black people to the kind of self-defense or violent resistance embodied by someone like Malcolm X. And that chronology, that sequence, as though somehow black people moved from being nonviolent towards self-defense, it misunderstands the whole period. These things always existed side by side with each other. And that's why we ended last time with Robert Williams, to make that same point even within the South. The Nation of Islam was founded in the 1930s, so back in the 30s. But it remained a really small, kind of fringe movement in black communities until World War II. In World War II, the Nation of Islam really began to start to spread. About 100 members of the Nation of Islam were imprisoned in World War II for resisting the draft. Which, of course, the whole point of a draft is it's not optional, right? And so, what do you think was the argument from the NOI for why black people shouldn't serve?
Why would you fight for a country that doesn't fight for you?
Right. In a country that denies you all the rights that it gives to other people in the country, there's no reason you should go fight for that country. So there was a little surge of members of the Nation of Islam who wound up in prisons. And from those prisons, they converted other black people in prisons. So the imprisonment of these draft dodgers actually turned out to be a kind of growth tool for the Nation of Islam. After World War II, the Nation of Islam was ruled by Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad wasn't the founder of the NOI back in the 30s, but after World War II, he was the leader of the NOI. Under Elijah Muhammad, the NOI preached a modified version of traditional Islam. So in many ways, members of the Nation of Islam were like other Muslims all around the world. They knelt to pray 5 times a day. They had a strict code of personal and moral behavior that they were expected to follow. They avoided premarital sex and drugs and alcohol and pork. What really distinguished the NOI from the other billion Muslims around the world was the Nation of Islam's teachings about race. According to Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, God made human beings black. So God's original creation had dark skin. And white people were devils. Now, what do you think? Literally devils? So, literally, devils. According to the NOI, these things that other folks called white people, they were actually devils. And they had originally been brought up to the surface of the earth by a mad scientist named Yaqub. And what color was that mad scientist?
Black.
Right. So remember, God's creation was black. And then it was a kind of deranged black scientist, Yaqub, who brought these devils up onto the face of the earth. And then Yaqub could not control the devils, and they were set loose on the face of the earth. And ever since the devils were set loose on the face of the earth, what had they really devoted their time and energy to doing? To God's chosen people, enslaving and oppressing and brutalizing and murdering and lynching them. So if you had grown up black in America, what did the NOI offer you?
A reason for the behavior, I guess?
Exactly. They offered you an easy-to-understand explanation for all of the evil things that white people did. And so if you could accept this story, well then, did you need to understand human psychology and the way it works over generations of brainwashing and twisting? No, you didn't need to understand any of those things. Why do white people do such evil stuff? Because they're devils. Problem solved. Got it.
Yeah, and when you go to New York, there are like people like sitting around the corners, like talking. But this time, I think they use Bible, but they teach about the hatred of the white people. I don't know whether somebody has already seen those group of people.
Yeah, I've
black,
seen them. They are an offshoot.
Do they have anything to do with it?
Yeah, they're an offshoot from here.
Why do they use Bible?
Well, because Muslims don't necessarily reject the Bible. Muslims see the Quran as really being built on top of the Bible. Yeah, but there are several groups like that, but I don't really understand the exact ways they split off from the NOI, but that's who those folks are. Yeah. The NOI, under Elijah Muhammad, told black people in these northern communities that the only people who could improve those communities were black people. You couldn't expect anything from the government, or from white people, or from some group like the NAACP. Because who's in it?
White people.
White people, right. Christians and devils. But this is the man most responsible for the growth of the Nation of Islam. So that's weird in a way. It wasn't actually the leader of the group who was most responsible for its success. It was Malcolm Little. Malcolm had grown up in Detroit, and as a kid, his father had been murdered by white supremacists, Klan sympathizers, basically. His father was murdered, and his mother wound up in a mental institution. And Malcolm, as a kid, drifted into petty crime. You know, his family had kind of disintegrated, he didn't have much, and he drifted into burglaries and robberies. And that is what ultimately got him sent to a Massachusetts prison in 1946. Malcolm was given 10 years in a Massachusetts prison for a burglary, a crime that normally got people 6 months. But he got 10 years. Because does anybody know who was helping him rob places? White women. Right.
Massachusetts prison?
Massachusetts is the state where he goes to prison. What's that?
It was in Boston.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so he had a little criminal gang, and there were white women who helped carry out the crimes. So what really gets him the 10 years?
He was associated with white.
Exactly. Because they knew that this black criminal was having sex with white women. 10 years. At this point, was there any reason to think that a guy like this had any great things in store for him in his life?
No.
No reason, right? He's come from a terrible background, he's drifted into crime and wound up in prison. But in prison, Malcolm converted to the Nation of Islam. His father had been a Baptist preacher, but Malcolm had never really had much religion at all. And now, he converted to the Nation of Islam. Like other people who wound up in prison, did the idea of turning your life around sound appealing? You bet. And that's why the NOI was good at reaching people from prisons. Because they told these people, if you accept Allah and kneel and pray, your whole life can be completely different from what it is now. And that, of course, sounded appealing to many people. Malcolm, in prison, now devoted himself to education. He devoured every book from the prison library that he could get his hands on. He was released from that prison in 1952. And the mathematically inclined among you have realized what?
Earlier.
Yeah, he didn't do the full 10 years, right? He was out in 6. Out in 1952, he was now the pivotal figure in spreading the Nation of Islam's influence through the cities of the North and the Midwest. Malcolm, like every member of the NOI, was never supposed to contradict Elijah Muhammad. So, he's supposed to basically duplicate what Elijah Muhammad says. And so, Malcolm repeatedly insisted that white people were devils. That's the NOI's official position. He railed against what he called the Uncle Tom Negroes, the Christian leaders who were trying to get black people to disrespect and degrade themselves. Who are these Uncle Tom Negroes he's talking about? Martin Luther King and all those other black ministers in the South who've been involved in these campaigns. Uncle Tom Negro. What does that mean? Right. And this comes from Uncle Tom's Cabin, that book from back in the 1850s. And Uncle Tom was a slave who took whatever abuse was given to him. Because Uncle Tom was a Christian. And Uncle Tom was sure that when he died, there would be a better world. So he did not resist the abuse from his slave master. So think about what Malcolm is doing by calling King an Uncle Tom Negro. It's really tough. He's saying that King wants all black people to disrespect themselves, to degrade themselves. Malcolm said instead that any human being who respected themselves, if you attacked that person, what would they do? They would fight back because they have self-respect and dignity. And he says if you don't fight back, then you lack those things. He told black people in Harlem and Detroit and these other cities that nothing would get better until we make it better. In a way, who does some of this echo back to? Marcus Garvey is who I was thinking. Really, lots of echoes with Marcus Garvey. In fact, Malcolm remembered as a little boy his dad telling him stories about Marcus Garvey. His dad had been a Garveyite. Malcolm became the editor of the NOI's newspaper, Muhammad Speaks. And that meant that it was Malcolm's words that were circulating around the country through the NOI paper.